If you're not sure why I'm standing over here instead of over there, at Ash Wednesday, I said that I was leading us into exile and making a big deal about pointing out that I am not in my comfort zone either. And so I am exiled from my pulpit for the season of Lent, just as we are studying the exile in our sermons and in our Lenten lunches. And so today we have come to the prophet Jeremiah and his call story and his proclamation. We read it together in our Old Testament section of our Pew Bibles and up aloud from up here. And afterwards I'm left with a significant question. How is this good news? The Bible is the good book. It tells us the good news of God. And over the last 2 weeks, we have traded the fire and brimstone of Zedekiah for the call of the prophet Jeremiah. And prophetic call stories are supposed to be uplifting. But this one promises only that Jerusalem and Judah will be under siege from Babylon, and that Jeremiah will be under siege from the very people to whom he is preaching. How is this good news? Even the commissioning, the beginning of this morning's passage is a briar patch of threats. See, today I appoint you over nations and over kingdoms to pluck up and tear down, to destroy and overthrow, to build and to plant. God lays 6 charges, 6 verbs on Jeremiah's ministry, and the first 4 are destructive. Pluck up, pull down, destroy, overthrow. How is this good news? Disaster has come to Jerusalem. The temple has been destroyed. The monarchy has ended. The institutions on which people relied were gone. Their homes are burning. Their loved ones have been killed or worse, and the foundation of their faith has crumbled beneath them. The Babylonian conquest of Jerusalem was a complete breakdown of society. And for the book of Jeremiah's audiences, God's plucking up and pulling down have already occurred. They portray the immediate past history of the readers and name the reality in which they live. The ministry of Jeremiah is in the aftermath of disaster. So we're fully into exile now. The invading army has inflicted wounds too terrible to bear. And the trauma of that seeps into the soul of the people. None of the old hymns are singable anymore, and none of the traditional prayers will even touch this heartbreak. Y'all know that before I was y'all's pastor, I worked for several months as a chaplain down at Spartanburg Hospital. And they've got one of the busiest emergency centers in the country at that hospital, and the chaplains were part of the trauma team. When a bad car wreck or some accident around the home or workplace, or from time to time intentional violence from one person to another, would bring someone into the hospital's trauma bay, I got paged to go down. And I always eventually made my way around to the same question. Can you tell me what happened? Now that question was not intended to be a conversation starter, it was an assessment tool. Someone who has been traumatized cannot answer that question. It's too difficult to bear. And so the brain fragments the experience. And speaking in more than just rehearsed cliches becomes impossible. Experiences of trauma cannot even be uttered. People turn off so that they can keep going. But afterwards, without warning, fractured remains can return with the force of the original experience. Today we call it post-traumatic stress disorder. In other time periods it was called shell shock. And in the days of Jeremiah, it was just living in exile. And the whole nation was going through it. The whole nation, at least those who survived, were carrying their trauma with them into captivity. How is this good news? As we journey alongside one another, as we travel with our theological ancestors, as we process with Jeremiah through the depths of disaster, how do we find the gospel? How is this good news? How is exile good news? How is anguish good news? How is the prophetic call to pluck up, pull down, destroy, and overthrow good news? And why in this passage, when God promises that He is watching over His word to perform it, do I feel more terror than comfort? Why, when God promises to be with Jeremiah, do I feel that's more a message of endurance than assurance? How is this good news? The short answer is that maybe it's not. Maybe this passage, or even most of the whole book of Jeremiah, is not meant to be good news. Maybe this is not good news. Odds are the people to whom Jeremiah ministered could not hear good news, couldn't wrap their heads around it because their world had warped underneath them and they could not stand. Maybe in the aftermath of catastrophe, encouragement loses its meaning and optimism evaporates like water from a half-empty glass. Maybe this is not good news. Last week, Zephaniah's harsh and anguished warning about the day of the Lord challenged us to look beyond what a friend we have in Jesus toward the God who is so offended by the injustice that we tolerate in the world. And this week, Jeremiah brings us a message that might not be good news. He's preaching in the aftermath of the devastation that Zephaniah anticipates. The traumatized people who are left alive after God sent Babylon through Judah cannot bear to hear good news right now, because what use is good news when everything around us is turned to ash? How is this good news? Maybe it's not. There's not a hero coming to save the day. Leah and I went and watched the new Marvel Black Panther movie last night. And there's not a hero like that in the book of Jeremiah. Everything is already lost. The kingdom has been conquered. And instead of a hero, the likes of which comic books would sing, those left after the suffering have a prophet. Jeremiah is an anguished man, a kind of anti-hero, wounded and isolated and broken, like the people of Judah in the grip of catastrophe. So maybe this message is not good news, but what this not good news does is very different than what it says. When God calls Jeremiah to pluck up and pull down, to destroy and to overthrow, God knows the people simply don't have the ability to rebuild. After the overwhelming destruction of their culture, they don't have anything left. neither material resources, nor emotional reserves, nor even the ability to imagine a better world. What they have instead are the words that the Lord has put in Jeremiah's mouth. Words that might not be good news, but it's news that the people can hear. Jeremiah's violent and terrifying prophecies, here glimpsed as an oracle of the siege of Jerusalem, are building the scaffolding that will allow for a more mature theology to be rebuilt in the exile. Jeremiah is called to build and to plant. And he's not building the foundations, at least not yet. This is just the scaffolding. It'll be torn away before it's all done, when the people can hear good news again. Jeremiah is not planting a crop that will be harvested. He's planting something that will hold the soil in place until the vineyard can be replanted. The traumatized people cannot bear to touch their experience. They cannot even remember what has happened to them without being re-traumatized again and again. And so as we read closely in this passage, we see that although that oracle may be about the destruction of Jerusalem, it is framed as remembering the destruction of the northern tribes of Israel. I will gather the tribes from the north, and I will sit in judgment against them. It keeps the disaster at a distance. Jeremiah is not talking about what happened to us. He's talking about what happened to those who have already been destroyed by the nation of Assyria. Jeremiah is building and planting a way of holding on to God that will allow their faith to survive, that will allow the healing of the national psyche and those of the individuals in it. And that means that this might not be good news, because it's not meant to make us hopeful. It's meant to put that shattered kingdom back together into the covenant people. And that bitter, exilic faith certainly makes me feel out of place. Jeremiah is giving news that might not be good news, because the people need to hear that God is still involved in some way. A God who blesses does not fit their reality, so they need a God who punishes, because a God who doesn't care is even worse. And so because God cares, because God blesses, God lets himself be seen as the God who punishes, until the good news can be heard again. The prophet Jeremiah will be the first one to articulate the new covenant which is fulfilled in Jesus Christ. But that won't happen for another 20-odd chapters. First, God must use Jeremiah to finish plucking up those false theologies. God must use Jeremiah to finish destroying the idols the people had grown to trust in lieu of a true faith in the Lord. And only then will God build a covenant that is based on the character of God rather than on the works of people. How is this good news? Maybe what it says is not. But what it does is say that even when we cry out, my God, why have you forsaken me? We do not make that cry alone. There is good news to come. One day. Someday. Maybe